Welcome
Hello.
back. I'm Olivia.
Welcome. I'm Amy.
And this is Girls Gone Spooky. Wowee.
We're having a great day today.
We're having a great day today.
Yes.
That's
and a great
sarcasm.
episode.
But it's about to be better because,
Yes.
great episode. We're talking about vampires.
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 As the Baron would say.
Have you seen the meme that's like me with my vampire teeth still in? Divorce?
I think maybe you sent it to me
or
or
really
described
it.
it. Yeah.
Probably. I've probably said it before. Divorce? What do you mean divorce?
That's funny.
100% would be me with the teeth in. Sorry.
Classic.
Not all that sorry.
No.
But we were just starting to talk about whether we think vampires are real. I will let you begin.
Okay. Well, based on my stories today, no.
Okay.
But
hard no.
In past episodes, yes. Comte Saint Germain.
Yes.
Is
extremely
one.
Convincing.
Yes. Yep. And even some of the others that I think maybe you'll
touch on.
Touch on. But then I also was reading more articles today about blood disorders that cause people to crave blood, like drinking it. So I don't know.
Wait, a blood disorder is what causes that? Sounds like out of Blade.
Let me see. Hang on. Maybe it wasn't a blood disorder or an autoimmune disorder.
I would think like a mental disorder, like human blood, or like maybe you need more iron or something, and so you crave like really raw meat. That to me makes a little more sense. Is like if you, or like a super iron deficient or something like that.
Yeah.
But that actually is like the origin story of a lot of like pop culture vampires. Like I think that's Blade. It's like a virus.
Yes.
There's another one though where it's like some sort of I guess disease. But so it's not a virus, but it's a disease that like spreads, but it is that where it's like you crave raw meat and then like other food becomes like unpalatable to you.
Yes. Yeah. I'm trying to find what I was looking at. Now I can't find it, of course. But it was some deficiency in kind of like what you were saying. But I think it's one of those like immunoglobulin something that maybe it's not
immunogoblins.
Yeah, immunogoblins. We need the goblins. But that also could have been on Reddit, and it was maybe like somebody saying, and I crave blood because I have blah blah blah. So maybe it's a personal experience.
Well, okay, so and here's my thing. If vampires are defined by people who drink blood, yes, there are vampires. Like we know factually people exist who drink human blood for funsies.
Yes.
Unfortunately. The more realistic definition that I like, to me, it's still a no. If that's what we're talking about, it's still a no. They have to be like kind of demonic, like have risen from the dead.
Yes. Immortal.
Need human blood. Long life.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay.
But I think that's like a pact with the devil kind of thing. Like I think a lot of like not cryptids per se, but like monsters, we'll call them. Like even like dark witches, like black witches. Like I think not skin color black, to be very clear. Like dark dark magic witches. Thank you. Black magic witches. I think they can be, there's a reason why they live to be like 110 and are like gnarled and scary. Crones, essentially. Or hags. Hag face.
Hag face.
Shout out hag face.
She was ugly.
She was ugly. But yeah, like so I think need for human blood, like you will die without it.
Yeah.
And only that. Like only human blood. That's the only thing that sustains you.
Yeah. Okay.
I
There
don't
are people
know.
that pretend that
See,
that's the case
it
for
though.
them.
That's it for me. And that's why it's a no for the people who are technically vampires because they drink human blood. Because it's like a cosplay. Like they're literally cosplaying.
Yeah.
As long as everyone's consenting. I mean, there's some people with like blood fetishes and stuff. Like if that's what you're into and all parties are 100% consenting, good with it, into it, do you.
Fine.
I don't want to see it, but do you.
Yeah. No, thank you.
But that's not vampirism. Like that's a sex cult.
Yeah.
Or a sex club. Maybe a club, probably.
A club, yeah.
Maybe not a cult, but a club. A club.
It's
a sex club.
We all fan. Yeah.
The club, we all vampires.
Yeah. We all wamps.
We all vampires. We all wamps. In the club, we all vampires. Okay, now I'm struggling with two different title options. We need the immunogoblins or in the club.
Oh yeah, club.
I guess we can say club. We all wamps. I think we all have to be wamps. That's pretty funny. Cracking myself up here. Well, actually, you cracked me up, so that's really funny.
Love that show so much.
It's so
both Broad City and
good.
What's the one? What We Do in the Shadows.
Yeah, I'm catching up finally on the latest season.
Oh,
and it is so funny.
It's just the best.
It's the best.
It's hilarious. Everything.
Guillermo's whole storyline, like all of it, is just so good.
Yeah,
it's so good. This season, I will say, Laszlo is like the most disgusting he's ever been.
Yes, he is.
Just like
with the like creating a monster,
Frankenstein. Yeah, it's and she's like, "You mean Dr. Victor Frankenstein?" And he's like, "I don't know who you're talking about."
I love that. Yeah.
So freaking funny.
But you know what I was thinking? This is embarrassing confession to make on a podcast.
Hit me with it.
You know when that trend of like the Hear Me Out cakes was going around? I was like, Laszlo might be on my Hear Me Out cake.
100%.
Even in this disgusting last season.
100%.
He might be on there.
He's so fun. Although I'm diehard Nandor. Like, Nandor or bust. I find him to be so attractive and he's so dumb. He's so dumb and funny. I love him. I love him to pieces. Okay, should we dive into this?
Yes.
So I'll with all my shit talking, I am going to start with vampires are real and they are among us. So an Atlanta Vampire Alliance survey. I'll let you let that percolate for a moment.
Vampire Alliance.
Yes. Atlanta Vampire Alliance. The AVA, if you will.
Yes.
Survey estimates that around 5,000 real vampires may live across the U.S. This is as of 2019, so those numbers are probably higher now.
More. Yeah. Baby vampires being born.
Baby wamps. So John Edgar Browning, an academic researcher at LSU, the Louisiana State University, claims that at least 50 vampires are living in the U.S. city of New Orleans alone. Some of them drink blood, either human or animal, and important detail, psychically extract energy from their victims. Now, this is not a direct quote from this academic researcher, and I suspect that he may bristle at having been quoted not saying allegedly psychically extract energy. But we'll take it at face value.
Yep.
He describes this real community of vampires as being made up of dozens of mini groups that overlap. Through pagan and other witchcraft-related groups and goth clubs, as well as various pagan groups, they meet one another, he said. So a lot of these social gatherings are like Dark Shadows conventions and other like vampire fiction and like fan organizations, bondage and S&M events, which are frequented, of course, by people who have blood fetishes and others, you know, who vampires find to be willing donors. So like people who are into drinking blood, others who want their blood consumed by somebody else, which like, okay.
Yep. Whatever.
And he's like, actually, this academic researcher's like actually met with a lot of these people and interviewed them. There are a lot of interviews like on YouTube and stuff of real vampires. And everyone that he's encountered, everyone, it's like, it's the same with like people who are into BDSM. Like the number one rule is consent, like consent and not harming your quote unquote prey. So vampire feeding, whether on blood or psychic energy, is always consensual and generally always medically safe. So they jump through like a lot of hoops, obviously, because if you think about all of the diseases that can be transmitted through blood, that's a long list. So both the vampire and the donor each have their blood tested beforehand, and there's a lot of care taken to ensure that blood is extracted using sterile tools and things like that. So it's a lot more clinical, less sexy, not quite so like
like
Bram Stoker's Dracula. But you know, to each their own. So I figured I'd start there with they're real, they're among us.
They walk among us.
And then they walk among us. And then I thought we'd graduate to the Highgate vampire. This was actually the story that inspired the theme for today, because we were like, we've exhausted all the vampire stories. No, we have not. Nope. There always seem to be more, and there are more than what I'm covering, at least today, that I came across, and I was like, holy shit. So in the northern outskirts of London, there's a stunning Gothic landscape, we'll call it. Wooded paths lined with 6 foot tall marble and granite headstones, most dating back 150 years. It's one of the very few cemeteries in the world that is also registered as a natural park, which is interesting. But amidst the centuries-old tombs and the occasional sighting of a wild fox, you may also run into a 200-year-old vampire. This is Highgate Cemetery. So, a little bit on the history. The original portions of the Highgate Cemetery were built in 1839 as a series of cemeteries surrounding the London core. From the start, the cemetery was marketed as a luxury plot for the well-off, which seems odd, but I know that's still a thing. And in fact, Highgate and the others of the series that were all built at once were nicknamed the Magnificent Seven. So there were 7 of them, and it was very like luxe, rich people were buried there. Some of its earliest tenants were the brilliant mathematician William Kingdon Clifford and even Karl Marx, the father of communism. So, the first century of Highgate Cemetery's existence was peaceful, very little paranormal mention. But in 1969, a group of youths, terrified out of their minds, alerted the local priest to their trespasses leading up to that moment. They told him how they had been exploring in Highgate Cemetery when one of the boys got carried away and opened a crypt. Bad start.
Smart.
Yeah. While the boys were attempting to close the door on the crypt and hide their vandalism, something moved inside.
Oh my God.
Not knowing what to make of it, they stayed and watched, at least until what they described as a gray figure rose from the crypt and stood upright. And that was when they started running. So they scamper on off, terrified, like scared the shit out of them.
Yes.
I mean, which like serves you right. You don't go open fucking crypts, you little freaks.
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, that's literally like grave. I mean, it's just bad on a lot of levels.
Don't do it.
And this begins a bit of a craze around Highgate Cemetery. So others began to see glimpses of what became known as the Highgate vampire. Some of these included reasonably high-ranking members of society, considering the stature of the cemetery. Its eyes were said to be blood red and would reflect like liquid when struck with light. It was described as at least 6 foot tall, but sort of hunched in a manner that gave it a much shorter appearance. The hair from its head was gone, as were its eyebrows and any facial hair it might have had when it belonged to the world of the living. Yeah. So by 1970, Highgate Cemetery and its now very famous tenant, the Highgate Vampire, were not a citywide sensation, but a panic. So residents in the surrounding communities of Dartmouth Park and Muswell Hill had taken to posting signs on the cemetery's fences calling for either the capture of the Highgate Vampire or destruction of the necropolis as a whole, which feels like a really dramatic response.
Yeah, that's too much.
But anyway, so then enters the vampire hunters. So fortunately, there were two London residents who were supposed experts on the subject at the time, a local man and self-professed exorcist, Sean Manchester, and also self-professed vampire hunter, David Ferrant. At first, each took up arms individually, declaring that they would destroy the Highgate Vampire, but before long, it turned into a bit of a rivalry between the two of them. It's important to remember at this point that as a result of the Highgate Vampire investigations, both Manchester and Ferrant were receiving a considerable amount of press. So they have some like solid incentive to get involved. Yeah. However, it doesn't change the fact that these kids saw something first. Yes. And then other people started seeing things, which we could call like whatever, mass hysteria or something. But the kids saw it first, which is like, I don't know, a little more believable to me. So the whole city of London is in a total state of panic over this vampire, and the news networks are just like, nom, 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 nom.
I love this.
I love this. This is so yummy. So the commotion and attributed media circus should have ended when Manchester launched a community-wide vampire hunt on Friday the 13th, because of course, and turned up 0 results. But now Manchester and Ferrant had become the attraction. So even 3 years later, there were rumors spreading that the two would meet in a magician's duel on Parliament Hill on the 13th, Friday the 13th, in April 1973. A year later, Ferrant would be arrested in a wooded park adjacent to Highgate Cemetery, carrying a wooden stake and a vial of holy water, no doubt intended for the elusive Highgate Vampire. They go on to like publish books, and anyway, there's a lot more like fluff that they've generated, including in Manchester's book. He like includes all these melodramatic details that are like very clearly pulled from Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like you're like, well, you stole that, but okay. There's the use of a psychic sleepwalking girl who leads him to a crypt. He describes the Highgate Vampire as an ancient vampire lord transported to England in a coffin by sea. But there were a number of very real and documented events that did occur during this time that really led in the ramp up to the Highgate Vampire during Manchester and Ferrant's whatever, like tomfoolery, but before that as well. So there's a lot of like still kind of like concerning, questionable things. So for example, foxes were turning up dead and completely drained of blood throughout Highgate Cemetery.
Suspicious.
Yeah, but more concerning was the discovery of a headless woman's corpse in a nearby lot.
Yeah, that's concerning.
A little bit, yeah. So you can see why, like, people were really freaked out. Like, it wasn't just these two guys definitely, like, fueled the fire, but the fire was already raging at this point. So the kind of theory is like, if a paranormal phenomenon was occurring at Highgate Cemetery, then their whole bullshit just covered over the whole thing and basically ruined any chance of figuring out what the hell was actually going on there. I suspect the Highgate Vampire, if he's real, hightailed it out of London, lickety split. I mean, he was freed from his crypt. Why wouldn't he go and explore Europe instead of end up on ITV or whatever? So remains a mystery to this day, considered to be sort of an urban legend, but at the same time, like, not really, because I don't know, it's a little weird.
Yeah.
It's a little weird.
What did those guys see? Those kids?
Yeah, I don't know. And then the foxes and the woman's body, like, was that just someone like desecrating a grave, like digging someone up? But there weren't reports of that. So it's not known, like, oh, was she taken out of a lot or from one of the other Magnificent Seven cemeteries? Like, but there isn't any, like, to their knowledge, it came out of nowhere. Like, her body just came out of nowhere with no head, which is very disturbing.
Yes.
So I'm going to get in a little bit to vampires throughout history. And this is where I'm going to start like speeding it up, because there's just like, there are just so many, like there are so many sightings and like weird things that have happened that are like not fully explainable. So it's hard for me in today's like day and age to like, yeah, vampires are real. I don't know. They feel like, you know how people joke, like, I can't wait for like 30 years from now, ghosts are going to be like, what's your Wi-Fi? Like, just like, it's hard for me to imagine a modern day vampire because they're so romanticized to us.
Yes.
But at the same time, like, I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. Like, it seemed possible in the 1800s, so why wouldn't it be possible now? Unless they've all died out because people became aware of them. But there's a lot of history here. So
they're all up in Forks, Washington.
Yeah, exactly. Sparkling in the woods, playing like really long range baseball. I want to rewatch that. Can we rewatch that when I come?
Yes, we can. Be so
okay. You guys, we are going to be recording an episode together in like less than a month.
I can't believe
Can
it.
you believe? So I know it happened so quick, which is like
rapid fire. I love it.
Which is exactly what our hope was. So, okay. So every culture that has ever existed has vampire myths and legends. I'm going to get into like which one is arguably the first ever, outside of like kind of pseudo-biblical stuff, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So the very first like story is probably Judeo-Christian stories of Lilith and her blood-drinking daughters. Biblical times, like, but before, like back to like, you know, the creation of the world, essentially. I'm not going to go into that into detail. There's Lilu, tribes. I don't even know exactly what Lilu is. I like read up about it and I was like, this is like, there's a lot here. So there's Lilith and her daughters, Lilu. Tribes in Madagascar tell stories of a blood-sucking creature called a ramanga. So for whatever reason, this like idea of a vampire, which is defined quite differently, even within like the Balkans, which is like so interesting to me.
Yeah.
And by the way, they're not Romanian. They're like, like distinctly Serbian. Like the word vampire is Serbian, which is so funny. Like, why did they change it to Romania?
Yeah.
Maybe just because people didn't understand the geography and like picked one. But anyway, like so funny.
Yeah.
So ancient people often suspected and feared that deceased loved ones would return from the dead and become a vampire. So vampire killing rituals, whether vampires are real or not, became common all over the world from the 15th century all the way up to the 19th century.
Yeah.
Some examples.
Crazy.
And some of these are kind of brutal. So like maybe skip ahead if you're a little...
squeamish.
You know, squeamish. I was going to say squirmish. And then I was like, squirmy, squeamish, whatever. In Venice, ancient corpses sometimes were found with bricks shoved into their mouths, which was a part of an ancient vampire slaying ritual. It's like a little too close to curb stomping for me, but okay.
Yes.
In Germany, lemons were placed into the mouths of suspected vampires. In Romania, garlic cloves were shoved into the mouths of corpses to prevent them from rising from the dead. This being the source of the popular myth that vampires hated garlic. In America, as recently as 1892, a young man's corpse was dug up and his heart was cut out and burned because he was a suspected vampire. They're, of course, usually thought of as fiction today, but there are still some areas of the world that have a very strong belief in real vampires, not the sex club ones, like real the lore kind.
Yeah.
In Malawi in Africa, people began reporting being attacked by vampires all throughout 2002 and 2003. The hysteria grew so much that suspected vampires were stoned to death, which is wild. A governor, Eric Chiwaya, was stoned by a mob that claimed that the government was colluding with vampires, and he barely survived the attack. So he wasn't killed, but he was nearly killed. In some small communities of Romania, the fear of vampires is still very real. In 2004, Toma Pitre was suspected to be a vampire by his family. So his family dug up his corpse, cut out his heart, burned it, and mixed the ashes with water in order to drink it.
Yeah.
That detail feels like a step way too far. Like, already rough to mutilate the corpse of your loved one, but you're gonna drink the ashes.
Yeah. No.
Yeesh.
Why?
And apparently this is an ancient technique used to destroy vampires. So
yeah. I have a story with that same detail.
Oh my god. Okay. I'm curious to hear that. So there's sort of two types of vampires, according to this article, that are prevalent in world culture. There are the primitive killers and the suave aristocratic vampire. Serial killers are often, real life serial killers are often dubbed vampires due to their ingestion of their victim's blood, which is arguably a form of cannibalism. And these cases can be related to the common idea of the more primitive vampire. So it's like not sexy. It's really just grotesque. The aristocratic vampire, popularized by Bram Stoker's Dracula, and perhaps even more so by Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, so like Interview with a Vampire, the Vampire Lestat, they have their sources in real life historical figures. Vlad III, Dracula, more commonly referred to as Vlad the Impaler, who I think Nandor the Relentless is based off of, right? He must be. So.
Yeah.
Okay. So he was the Prince of Wallachia, which is modern-day Romania, and is best known, historically speaking, for his fierce resistance of the Ottoman Empire into his territory. In Eastern Europe and Romania, Vlad is often looked at as a hero who resisted an empire. In Western Europe, word spread of his affinity to torture his enemies, and he became more a villain than a hero. So he has a very twisted kind of background. Numerous purported tortures included burning people alive, skinning the feet of criminal offenders and putting salt on the wounds, skinning people alive, boiling people alive, and of course, impaling. So pretty brutal. But yeah, we're calling him a suave aristocrat, I guess. Anyway, they have a lot more stories of Vlad the Impaler's violence, but we're going to skip over those. Another historical figure that contributes to this aristocratic vampire is Countess Elizabeth Bathory, often called the Blood Countess. Bathory has become one of the most prolific female serial killers in history. She was a countess in the Kingdom of Hungary, modern-day Slovakia, in the 14th century and early 15th century, and it said that she was responsible for the deaths of over 600 people. Yeah, have we talked about her? It's more true crime than paranormal, but it sounds
vaguely
really familiar. Yeah.
How do you spell her name?
Bathory. So it said that she would bite the flesh off of the face and hands of her victims, and sexual tortures would also occur. Perhaps the most bizarre of all of her atrocities, though, is that she would bathe in the blood of virgins in hope of retaining her youthful beauty. I do think we covered her with that piece.
I think maybe.
Historians disagree on what crimes, if any, she was actually guilty of, but popular culture has taken this idea of the Blood Countess and really run with it. There are biological and psychological sources for the vampire myth throughout history. For example, today, many scientists believe it was ancient people's misunderstanding of decomposition that resulted in many being accused of being vampires. So as the body decomposes, there's sort of this illusion of hair and fingernails growing as your skin is receding. And I actually do think your nails continue to grow for at least a little bit because they're such slow growing cells. So yeah, anyway, people would, dig up bodies and they're still alive. Their hair and nails are growing. It's like, okay, no.
Yeah, that's not how it works.
And yeah. And then if someone were to, this is very graphic. So again, squeamish, skip forward 30 seconds. If someone were to stake a cadaver swollen with the gas that your body fills with when you are deceased, it would cause the gas to look for an escape route. So if it comes out through your vocal cords, it's going to sound like you're yelling.
Yeah.
Or groaning, or it also could come out your pooper and it could be a little tooty. But
yeah.
Anyway, both of these can be confused by life after death. Like, well, how are you tootin' if you're dead?
Yeah.
I'm a stay tootin', I'll tell you that.
You might.
I might. You gonna stay burping for sure.
Yep.
That's my girl. Anyway, so some doctors have also established a link between rabies and the belief in vampires. They suggest that the vampires that ancient people fiercely believed in were merely people in the late stages of rabies. I didn't know this. Rabies can cause hypersexuality.
I don't think I knew that either.
You're just like
foaming at the mouth.
Real thirsty. Literally foaming at the mouth for a little action.
Wow. That's weird.
Disruptions in very weird disruptions in sleep patterns, like becoming nocturnal. A bloody foaming at the mouth, which would give you the look of having just drank someone's blood. And causing someone to have the urge to bite someone, like, you know, rabid raccoons and stuff like that. It happens to people too.
Interesting.
Yeah. On the psychological side, historians have noted that the belief in vampires often rises when ancient communities are going through times of mass outbreaks of disease, which makes sense. Perhaps the only way that ancient people knew how to explain some of these epidemics that were killing them were through folkloric tales and urban legends like vampires. Freudian psychologists believe vampires represent the darker side of human nature, and that these are manifestations of secret human desires. Not so secret in the case of modern day vampires, but okay. But for whatever reason, the vampire legend is here to stay. Like, this is just something that, if you believe it, if you don't believe it, like, these stories never get old. Edward Cullen is evidence of that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about, like, this talked about, like, the primitive vampire versus the, like, suave, sexy vampire. There are also other kinds throughout the world and throughout history. So there's some, like, argument around who the first vampire was. Like, obviously, like, Vlad the Impaler and all of these, but, like, more, we'll call them modern day. But the first is one that Amy's covered before. So this is Peter...
Lord knows.
Plagojewicz. Okay. The Serbian vampire, which was 1725. And I'll just do a quick recap. But this is actually arguably where the word vampire came from, was Peter. Like, he's actually the first vampire because they were never called that before. So this is one of the best ever documented vampire cases in the village of Kisalava, Serbia, when a local farmer, Peter P., died. He apparently did not stay dead. 3 days after his death, he returned from the grave. I'm going to do this quick because you've been through it before. Visiting his son and demanding food. His son fed him, he ate, he left. On the second night, the son told the neighbors what had occurred and, deeply troubled by it, stayed up waiting to see if his father returned, but he didn't. However, on the third night, he came again, demanding to be fed, but the son refused him because he was so freaked out by this whole thing. And Peter was said to have given his son a threatening look upon leaving, and the son's body was found the next day. Within 8 days, 9 more people died. And on their deathbeds, the victims allegedly claimed to have been throttled by Peter at night and of him biting their necks and drawing blood from the wound, all apparently dying from exhaustion and blood loss. It's compelling.
That's wampy.
It is very wampy. Very wampy. So his wife also stated that he had visited her and asked her for his shoes So she moved to another village. She was like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
The local magistrate and priest contacted a local army commander who happened to be staying nearby. The commander arrived shortly after receiving the message with 2 soldiers, and they promptly set about exhuming the corpses of all those who had died with the local magistrate and priest. They examined the grave of Peter P. and discovered his corpse was perfectly preserved and his mouth was smeared in fresh blood, his hair, beard, nails still growing after death. So we know that last part is discounted, which they didn't know at the time. But this is the thing that's kind of weird, is they staked him in the heart, blood gushed out, which, okay, fine. And after this, they decided it was best if they burned his body on a pyre. They reburied the bodies of his victims with garlic, and nothing ever happened again. There's no more deaths in the village. It's just like, people don't just die of exhaustion from mass hysteria. Like, that just seems unlikely.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know.
That is a weird one.
It is a really weird one. So the rival story competing for first place is Sava Savanovic, who is among one of the first known cases of vampires, also native to the Balkans. He's usually considered the first vampire in Serbia. So I guess, like, we just accept that, although the date isn't precise. It's the 17th or 18th century, and Peter was in the 1700s, so it's hard to say. But reports of vampires and other mystical beings were not uncommon in those regions through the late 19th century. So Sava Savanovic was this guy, very briefly, from a village of Zarozje in western Serbia. He was the owner of a small water mill, and there was like all this politics behind the water mill that I was like, I'm not tracking, and this is boring, so I didn't include it. After he died, he, again, did not stay dead. Everyone who tried to work there ended up dead. So he killed all of the millers who had come to grind their grain while he frequented the mill each night for about 90 years.
Oh.
Yeah, long time. And people would just die. They'd just die. Show up dead. And with like bite marks or drained of blood, like really weird shit. So he, of course, inspired horror movies. One in Serbian, I am not even going to try to pronounce this, but it's the translation is 90 years later. And then there was a horror film in 1973 that was also based on the legend called Fear and Its Servant. Actually, no. That one's Leptirica is the other film, the 1973 one. And then there was a novel called Fear and Its Servant by Mirjana Novakovic. So yeah, like he's like now the tourist mascot of this city in this like region of Serbia, which is like kind of funny. But the villagers, like at the time when this first started, like not after 90 years, but throughout, would try to find him and destroy his body, and they could never find him. But he is said to have killed his victims by sucking out their life essence through forceful touch. So, like, there were some accounts of, like, bite marks on the neck or, like, blood loss, but it wasn't, like, all of them were like that. There was sort of almost like a death by fear, like, scared to death kind of vibe. But I don't know, maybe he choked them. Like, I don't know exactly what it was, and there aren't good records of it.
Yeah.
But there are more. The Balkans are just chock full of vampires. Arno Pavle, he lived in the village of Medveda in Serbia, and after he died, around 15 other people died as well. Apparently he came to them, like they reported seeing him, and then they'd show up dead. And like inspectors went to investigate and could never figure out what had happened. So they, burned his body and it stopped. Like, that's what's so weird to me, is it's like, you could just chalk it up to like a serial killer, or maybe the serial killers of the time were really like thoughtful about it, and we're like, well, if I pretend I'm a vampire, then they're just going to blame this guy, and then when they burn the body, I have to move on. But I don't know, that feels like a stretch for that time.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's a lot of planning.
A lot. But I wanted to touch really quickly on this like idea of like types of vampires. So in Romania, they have the Nosferatu, which is like an incubus. So it's like very sexualized. The Moroi or Moroi, I think it's Moroi, is like hairy, kind of like a werewolf, and expels the soul of his body to suck blood as like an evil mist. So that's more like the Sava one, I would say, the Miller. And then a Strigoi is one that can change form and has 2 hearts. So that one feels a little more like cryptidy maybe than the others, but these come from all over the Balkans. Sorry.
That's interesting.
And then there was one other like funny little, not funny, like wild little thing that I figured I'd add in here. A user on Reddit, Yellowcake454, added just one final note from the comments I pulled. During the Austro-Hungarian occupation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, there were strange reports of cases where they found bodies without any blood in them. The regional government asked for help, and 2 doctors were sent from Vienna to investigate independently the cause of such a phenomena. Both of them concluded it was the work of a vampire. So, like, medical professionals were like, it was a vampire for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely a vampire.
What was the time period?
This was the Austro-Hungarian occupation. Hold on.
I don't know my history of that part of the world.
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, either 1915 to 1918.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think my ancestors are from there.
Oh,
Austro-Hungary. Really? Yeah.
Oh, cool. On which side?
Where the crazy comes from. Maybe both. I mean, we don't know a ton about my maternal grandfather's lineage, but on my dad's side, I think.
Okay, cool.
So yeah.
Wow. Austro-Hungarian
vampires.
Cool. Vampire. Yeah.
Hungarian, Serbian vampires.
Yes, vampires.
Welcome, vampires.
What?
So yeah, those are my stories. Okay. So pause here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think vampires are real?
Oh God, I don't know.
These feel compelling.
Yes, they do.
Like some of them, not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah, but why aren't there stories like that now?
Right.
That's
unless
the question.
They've just like evolved with the times.
Yeah, they're all eating deer, drinking animal
and sparkling
blood
in the woods. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. No, probably not that, but I don't know. It just seems so far-fetched when you think about it.
Yeah.
But it's spooky, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But do you remember that because I think it was in the original vampire episode we did, we also talked about werewolves.
Oh,
and there were some like very
really compelling ones.
stories about that. So
that to me though, it's like just screams cryptid.
Yes.
Whereas vampires, like if we're gonna take them at the like face value of the legends, they're like they've sold their soul to the devil. They have long life, but have to feed on humans. They can only come out at night. They have like psychic power. I mean, I don't know that description just feels so like, where did Bram Stoker come up with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I saw something about that, and some people argue that it was Vlad the Impaler.
Yeah,
was the inspiration.
But so, like the psychic part, like and the super sexualized part, like what?
Yeah,
because I mean, for sure, like that was the inspo. I mean, his last name was actually Dracula.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
I don't know. It's a weird vibe, man.
Yeah, and to turn the Vlad the Impaler story into something sexual is kind of weird.
Dark. Yeah, so weird.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, your turn. Sorry, I just had to do a little in between ask.
Yeah. those Serbian ones are pretty interesting.
Interesting.
I must say.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, let's do some. These will not convince you of the existence of vampires. So the first one is really short because I saw this article about a documentary that was going to be on Netflix.
Oh, okay.
Called The Vampires of Gem City.
Oh.
And it has since been canceled for an unknown reason.
Oh.
But
oops.
It's like very very misleading.
Okay.
So the documentary was going to talk about the case of the disappearance of George Philip Gall, who goes by Phil.
Okay.
Philly. He disappeared. Yeah, Philly. He disappeared in 1994. And this documentary was trying to say that his disappearance was related to a vampire coven in Dayton, Ohio.
Oh.
So, because Phil was last seen walking towards a nightclub that's called The Asylum in Dayton. And it's a place that's known...
Ohio? I know. Kind of like a dark night scene. Jeez. Yes,
a little
Asylum.
bit. I know.
With a bunch of vampires. Jesus.
Yes. Yeah. It's like a club for goth people, essentially.
Oh, like, okay. I dig that.
Yes. Yeah. So his disappearance went unsolved. It's actually still unsolved. But it took a strange turn in 2008 when there was a retired police lieutenant. His name was David Williams. He claims to be an expert on the occult.
Classic.
Which is an interesting combination.
Yeah.
And he claimed that the club was a secret meeting spot for individuals who identified as vampires.
Mm-hmm.
And he suggested that in his investigation of the club, a bartender had told him that Phil was involved in a ritual. He was beheaded and his body was discarded in a nearby storm sewer or storm drain.
Jesus.
So, yeah, but...
Is that actually how his body was recovered?
I don't think they found a body.
Oh.
So we still don't know.
Stretch? That's a stretch.
Yes, it is. And it's a tragedy no matter what, because he is gone, disappeared.
Yeah.
And it's still a cold case. But I was looking on Reddit to see other, thoughts on this. And somebody wrote a comment, actually a couple people were commenting that they used to go to this club in the 90s. Okay. And it was the reality of what was happening was that they were LARPing as vampires.
No.
It was live action role play of a game called Vampire the Masquerade. So it was a game.
I would go. I would.
Yes.
No question. I would go.
Get your teeth and go.
I've got the custom ones now, baby.
Yes. Yep.
Should I bring them with me? Should I wear them out one night?
Yes, maybe. Just see if somebody comments.
I feel like when I was single, every outing was an opportunity to meet someone. And now that I'm in a relationship, I feel free. Yeah. I feel free to be me.
Yep.
Because he knows I'm a freak.
Yes.
He's like, and I still love you.
Fine.
So
accept it. Yeah.
I want to scare some people. Should I just come in all black and bring my teeth on the flight?
Yes. And try to shy away from the window.
My cloak gets
burning.
Just cover myself in sunscreen.
Yeah, the zinc kind. So these are all pasty white.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Yeah, that one, I think it's very misleading. Maybe that's why it was canceled, for them to frame it that way. So
I wonder if there's anything about the cancellation. Did you find anything?
In the articles that I was reading, the family of Phil, they didn't know. Netflix didn't give a reason.
Oh my God.
It just was never mind. So, I don't know.
The family was disappointed by the decision.
Yes. Yeah, I think because it's a cold case, so it'd be like, this is a good opportunity for people to hear more about the case and all that, and maybe
it sounds so it's like, I'm just reading the like Gemini summary, but it's like the documentary was about the disappearance of George Philip Gall in Dayton, Ohio in 1994. The documentary was said to have changed focus from Gall's disappearance to a focus on a community of vampires, and I suspect Netflix was like, no.
Yeah.
True crime? Yes. Vampire LARPers? No.
Not. Yeah. No.
Not
okay.
it.
That
Maybe
makes
it'll
sense.
come back. You never know.
Yeah. I'd still watch Vampire LARPers.
Either way.
Yes.
I would watch it.
Yep. Yeah. Okay.
That's so funny.
Well,
oh my God.
Maybe we can keep an eye out for that in the future, but
yeah.
The murder was not because of vampires.
No. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Definitely not. But that's a nice nod. I appreciate the nod.
Yeah. The murderer could have been a self-identified vampire.
For sure, yeah.
But
totally.
I don't know. Anyway, let's get on to the other one. So we have like danced around this kind of before, and the final story I know that we've covered. But I was looking at vampire stories, and there was a huge vampire panic in New England. Have we talked about that before?
I don't think so.
Okay. I didn't think so either, because it is still being studied. I guess this person who's kind of a specialist in folklore still is studying this. He wrote this whole big article for the Smithsonian, so that's the main source for this. But yeah, the New England vampire panic. So it starts with, in 1990, there were some children in Connecticut who were playing, and they found a few graves, which is scary.
Yeah.
But, at first, they were like, this might be a serial killer, because it was like a bunch of bodies next to each other. But it turns out that they were part of a colonial era cemetery that was at least a century old. Most of the burials were typical of the 1700s and 1800s. There were simple coffins, no valuables, but there was one grave that they called burial number 4 that stood out. And it was because this grave contained a stone crypt and a body that had been beheaded and had other post-mortem injuries.
So that's not funny, but holy shit.
Yeah, so they beheaded this person after they were dead already.
Oh my gosh.
And also like relocated other bones in their body. So they started calling this JB for some reason. I don't know why, what that stands for. But it also, so the skull that had been removed, they placed it in a skull and crossbones pattern, like the Jolly Roger, whatever it's called. The pirate.
Yeah, the pirate ship
pattern. Yeah. So obviously people started investigating that.
So the head is removed from the body, but it's still there, and they put the skull and crossbones and then his body.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
that gives me chills. That's really spooky.
It is spooky, and it never circles back to the Jolly Roger thing. I don't know why they did that, but it's just presumed that this was probably part of this vampire panic that happened. So this says specifically in 1854, there was a vampire panic in nearby Jewett City, Connecticut, where townspeople exhumed and also mutilated the bodies of suspected vampires.
Vampires,
excuse me. So
yeah, get it right.
Nearly 2 decades after JB's grave was discovered, it's still the only intact archaeological evidence of the vampire hysteria in the region. Most other graves that are linked to these events have been lost or remain undisturbed, as they've now started discouraging people from digging them up. But our folklorist, his name is Michael Bell, he researches these events by digging through records, tombstones, genealogies, etc. So, despite the rarity of physical evidence, reports about vampire panics from the 19th century are relatively plentiful, including mentions in newspapers. There's also a log from a traveling minister that talks a lot about it, and also Henry David Thoreau's personal journal talks about vampires.
Whoa, what?
Yeah, so interesting stuff. But you kind of touched on this also, that one thing that we do know for sure coincides with this panic is like a raging tuberculosis outbreak. And families would blame the early victims for being the ones that spread the disease.
I see.
And then they would exhume the bodies and stop the vampires from attacking their living relatives.
That's horrible.
Yeah. And the rituals that surrounded the exhumations varied a lot. Apparently in Vermont, they were like celebrations at the time. It was like a big to-do, exhuming these suspected vampires.
I don't even know how TB is like contracted, but is there a potential that would have spread it even more? Handling the dead bodies of people who died from TB?
I would think so. I don't know that brutal. For sure. But isn't
I'm gonna
TB
look it up. The consumption? Yeah.
Yes. The consumption.
Yeah.
So definitely could be. But yeah, I'll wait for you to
I'm just gonna look to see. Workers who routinely handle corpses may risk contracting tuberculosis and bloodborne viruses like Hep B, C, and HIV, as well as gastrointestinal infections. Cholera, E. coli, Hep A, Salmonella, Shigellosis typhoid. Jesus.
It's a lot of
That's from the
bacteria.
World Health Organization, which,
although
the United States president doesn't believe in, we believe in the World Health Organization. So,
not anymore.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Just kidding.
Help us.
Not.
No. Amy is very pro public health.
Yes. Yeah.
Works at a hospital.
Yeah. Yeah, majored in public health.
Yeah, exactly.
In my master's. Yeah. Okay, where did I leave off? Oh yeah, so it varied how they did this. Some people were celebrating, some people were quiet about it. Sometimes the dead were just exhumed and then flipped face down because they thought that would keep them trapped. And others,
it's very creative.
They can't get up somehow.
No.
And others had their hearts removed and burned. And sometimes inhaled. So just like how you were talking about.
Inhaled? Like huffing it is just like next level.
Yeah. You're going to get TB or
you're going to get TB
else.
For sure.
Yeah.
Or just like a lung disease.
Yeah.
Yeesh.
Just any kind of infection.
Yeah.
Sure. But
Yikes.
Yeah. So Michael Bell, the folklore guy, he is focused on understanding not just this hysteria itself, but the people involved. So both the accused vampires and their accusers. And let's see, one of the most tragic stories that he researched, and this is the one that we have talked about before, is of Mercy Brown, who was called Lena by her family. And I just have a little bit more detail about it because this was a very interesting story that her whole family sadly was passing away from tuberculosis. First her mother, then her aunt, and her mom was Mary Eliza and her aunt was Mary Olive, which is kind of cute.
Oh.
But they both died, and let's see, the Brown's family suffering alongside the widespread fear of tuberculosis set the stage for the events that would lead to Mercy Brown's posthumous exhumation. Wow. So she was just a child when her mother and her aunt died, and she didn't fall ill until nearly a decade after they were buried. Her tuberculosis was the galloping kind, which I had never heard of, which meant that she might have been infected a long time ago, but she remained asymptomatic
like
for
dormant,
years.
kind of, yeah.
Yes, but then it's called galloping because once it does manifest, you go really fast.
Yeah.
So she passed away in 1892. Oh, and I think I forgot to say they called her Lena, not Mercy. No, you did, yeah. Okay.
Lena.
So Lena was on her deathbed. Her brother was after a brief remission, so he had TB too, taking a turn for the worse. Edwin had returned to where they lived from Colorado, because that's where everybody was sent for TB treatment because of the fresh air.
Yeah. That's far to go for fresh air. Damn.
Yes. Yeah, especially from Rhode Island, I think is where they are. That is very far. So yeah, by the time he came back, he was not doing well. And let me try to find the part where I'll just skip ahead because I know it now by heart, that he ends up being the one that exhumes her body and eats the ashes of her heart. So, and then let's see, he died 2 months later, less than 2 months later.
Jesus.
So, yeah, they thought that, for whatever reason, they really thought that Lena was the vampire that was causing...
Even though so many people died before her.
Yes. Yep. Oh, and it's because, the reason that they did exhume the mom and the aunt as well, but they were already, like, decomposed at that point.
I see.
But Mercy, or Lena, was fresh. She was also buried in an above-ground tomb in January in Rhode Island.
Frozen and preserved, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she hadn't... Yeah, she was not decomposing very quickly.
Yeah.
So, this was another little interesting tidbit. This story in particular did catch on, like it got into newspapers. And one clipping it was in 1896 in the New York World, I think, newspaper or magazine, found its way to a London stage manager and aspiring novelist named Bram Stoker. So...
What?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's so funny that I was like, what would have inspired him?
Yeah.
That's so weird.
I think that the timeline is a little off. Like, probably was already writing Dracula by the time that this was happening. But it's still interesting that people know it came across.
Very interesting. His desk. Huh.
His desk. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yep. And then one last little detail is the author of this article, Mercy Brown's descendants still live in the area. Okay. And they still have a quilt that she sewed. And so which is, really cool.
That's incredible.
Yes.
And it's like an artifact. That's not even like an heirloom. That's an artifact.
Yeah, it is.
When the whole family was wiped out too, how are there even descendants?
Right. Good question. I don't know how.
Cousins or something, maybe.
Yeah, it's probably pretty distant at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, they somehow have this quilt that she sewed.
Wow.
They showed it to the author of this article. He described it as pink, blue, and cream colored. Looks like really fields of tiny daisies is what he described. And I'll just read this last part. He said, "It's the work of a farm girl without any wasteful applique. Lena clearly ran out of material in places and had to scrimp for more. Textiles scholars at the University of Rhode Island have traced her snippets of florals, plaid, and paisley to the 1870s and 1880s, when she was still a child. So they wondered if she used her mothers and aunts and sisters and whoever old dresses after they passed away. And maybe she had to learn this household skill earlier than other girls did because she lost all the women in her family.
Oh my God. That's just amazing. Historians can we're like, oh yeah, we can tell exactly the decade those textiles are from.
Yes.
Yeah,
it is impressive.
The fuck? It's so amazing.
Yep. And the family feels really lucky to have this, as you can imagine. And they say she ended up leaving something beautiful behind. She didn't know that she'd have to leave it, but she did.
Yeah.
And now people do say that she hasn't left entirely. Her ghost is said to frequent a bridge in the area, and that she also manifests as the smell of roses.
Oh.
And she appears in children's books, which surprises me, and also paranormal TV shows.
Yeah.
Which doesn't surprise me.
No. I also think there's a vampire... there's a vampire book series that's just dawning on me, and I'm not remembering the full name, but it's each book is called something different, but it's called the Mercy West series or something like that. But she's a vampire hunter. I wonder if she inspired... I'm gonna look it up. I wonder if she inspired the Mercy Thompson. Yeah, it was super popular. And they may have Amazon Prime optioned the rights to make a TV series. So I don't know. I don't think they have yet, but people are really excited. They're 15 books. They're a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
And they're supposed to be really good. They're I think a similar vibe to the Sookie Stackhouse ones, True Blood, the True Blood inspo.
Yes.
So anyway, just a little aside about Mercy.
Cool. Yeah. It sounds like, her story has become pretty popular and well known. But the last thing about this quilt is that these historians found that the pattern she used was really rare in Rhode Island. It's sometimes called the wandering foot, and it carries a superstition of its own.
Oh.
It says anybody who slept under a quilt of this pattern would be lost to their family, doomed to wander. Which is weird. So the wandering foot pattern, if you're a quilter, don't sleep under a quilt. But
that's really freaky.
Yes.
Especially the fact that not the rest of the the rest of the family doesn't seem to haunt the area, but she does.
She does. Yeah. Yep.
Very interesting.
Spooky. Yeah.
Poor Lena.
I know. Rest in peace.
Yeah. R.I.P. girl.
Didn't deserve that treatment.
Jeez. I mean, at least she was gone,
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah. Yes. That's a blessing.
Yeah.
But, and her brother,
he was scarred for the last couple months of his life, I'm sure.
It's probably good that he went quickly after.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Yuck.
Jeez. But, very yuck.
Okay, now do you believe in vampires?
Maybe. I mean, not because of that.
No.
That really kind of threw some water on my my belief a bit, but I don't know. There are definitely just a lot of things that we can't explain, and maybe they're all kind of the same thing, ghosts, or maybe not. Ghosts I think are one thing, but then cryptids, I don't know. I think there's definitely some weird stuff that has happened that I don't think is human.
Yes,
that's my...
I agree. Yep.
Tie it in a bow ending statement.
And that's why we're able to have this podcast.
Exactly. So thank God. I mean, not for the people who died,
yes.
R.I.P.
Yeah. We know what you meant.
Yeah. You guys, next week is Valentine's Day, so it's gonna be a scary stories edition. And I feel like we should probably do love themed ones.
Yes. Okay.
So we will get to work on that. But go check out the website. You can submit your scary stories there. You can also DM us, follow us on social at Girls Gone Spooky, everywhere. Please rate and review the pod if you like it. It helps. Tell your friends if they're spooky little babies too.
Mm-hmm.
And until next week, stay spooky.
Stay spooky. Bye.
Bye.